Hello, my name is Caleb Denby, and welcome back to Game Review. Alright everybody, today we're going to be going over a game between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen, Magnus with the white pieces in this case, from the Chessable Masters tournament that Chess24 is hosting. And this has truly been a really unique and interesting tournament thus far. As of recording day, they have just, I believe, finished the preliminary stage where they had a group A and a group B that each played a round robin or maybe a double round robin with each other. And the top 4 from each group of 6 managed to advance to the playoff stages. And it was pretty interesting, actually. In Group A, we had Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura, a few other very notable names. And then in Group B, we essentially had the candidates roster. 6 players, all from the candidates. So it was really unique to see these two groups and how these players are interacting. In this game, of course, we had Magnus against Hikaru. So in this game, of course, we had Magnus playing 1d4, Hikaru, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, avoiding any potential Nimzo Indians with knight c3. This is kind of the popular move order these days from the Grandmasters. Turns out they've decided there's not so much to be gained by playing knight c3 first, that it's worth risking the Nimzo in a lot of cases. So d5 instead, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop f4, and castles. And this is a line that Hikaru has actually been repeating more or less in every game that he's gotten in the Queen's Gambit. He plays the same huge ED line and has been daring his opponents to prove that white can try for an advantage here. Now, pretty much everybody and their grandmother has been playing e3 in this position. Hikaru has been playing knight bd7 rather than c5 here, and this allows white to play this move c5. And so players with the white pieces have really been attempting to prove an advantage here against Hikaru with this far advanced c-pawn. You end up in a position that is super closed with at least 1 or 2 files being opened on the queen side at a later date, sort of at black's discretion. And really, it's black deciding when to open these files. And players have had mixed results against Hikaru. Some have managed to win. Hikaru has managed to hold a lot of games. But that is not what we got in this game. Magnus had actually come up with a new idea here in the form of a3. Now, there are 3 moves highlighted on the board. These are the 3 main responses to a3. Now, a3, of course, is definitely a very serious sideline. Just for reference, in my database here, there are 7,200 games that went white playing e3, only 300 with white playing a3. So it's a move, but not a very common move. And so, more often than not, players have played b6, they've played c5, challenging the center, and they've played d takes c4. Now, in my opinion, I do think a move like c5 is probably objectively the best move here. And in fact, Hikaru has actually played multiple games in this exact variation with c5. And I think he's won quite a number of them with black, actually. And the reason I think c5 is just objectively the best move is because without playing e3 and playing a move like a3 instead, white is very seriously claiming he wants to play the move b4 at a later date, and he's kind of doing it at any cost. Now, of course, a3 is a much less good developing move for white, which means white is going to be a little bit behind in this battle for the center here. So because a3 doesn't develop, doesn't control the center, it's black's time to strike in the center with the move c5. Now, in this game, Hikaru instead decided to repeat what he's been doing with the move knight b to d7. Now, I do actually think this is sort of what Magnus was hoping for. Knight b to d7 is the 4th most popular move, and I believe it's not the most popular because it does allow white's next move. Magnus, in this game, plays the move knight b5. And I think this was sort of the point of Magnus's play. And this is the danger when you're a top-level grandmaster and you're repeating the same line game after game after game. You're going to run into some pretty interesting novelties or ideas, or even if they're not novelties, sidelines that you absolutely must be prepared for. If you're going to repeat the same thing every game, you're allowing your opponents to sort of take their best shot at you every time they get this position because they know they're going to get this position. In this case, I'm not so sure Hikaru was as well prepared as he thought he was. There's only really one move here for black. You can't play something like c6. You're just asking for knight c7 to happen to you, with disaster striking thereafter with this rook on b8 hanging. Although, actually, this would not be the line. Hold on. c6, bishop c7 would be the issue, of course, and then knight d6. Sorry, I forgot that this rook was actually defended, but knight d6, and then this rook does get trapped on f8. My apologies. Okay, so c6 not playable. That means the only real choice here is knight e8, just defending this c-pawn. And knight e8 is understandably a little bit awkward for black, not his most comfortable move here. Now the move e3 does come on the board for Magnus, and he's sort of achieved everything he wants to achieve out of this opening, you know? He's got this bishop opened up, he's defending his c-pawn. For the moment, moves like c5 are pretty well under control, because these knights are just a little bit too awkward for black to handle. He's going to have issues on the d5 square because this knight is in the way of its own queen. In the actual game, Hikaru started with d takes c4, and this is very much not my favorite move by Hikaru. Likely what happened is he wanted to play the move c5, but the issue here, as stated, is that this knight is just a little bit in the way, and this would run into c takes d5, e takes d5, and then a move like knight c3, a move like d takes c5, when this e-pawn, or d-pawn rather, is going to be a little bit weak in the long run, I think. Something like knight c3, even immediately. And this IQP is not going to be so comfortable because knight e8 is very much not a useful move in these positions. So to try to avoid that, Hikaru actually takes on c4. The issue with this, of course, is that white is usually happy to play these positions after having wasted a tempo with bishop d3 followed by bishop takes c4. In this case, Magnus definitely gets an edge over these positions by taking on c4 in one fell swoop without moving the bishop first. Now Hikaru tries for some very concrete play, playing c5 immediately to try and clarify the structure in the center and sort of equalize in this manner. And the issue with this is my feeling of these positions has always been if white can get c5 in and manage to contest these files and develop his pieces, then by all means he is going to be absolutely equal with no problems in these positions. The issue arises when black can usually get d5, d takes c4, and c5 in all at once. But white can sometimes still have an advantage in these positions if his pieces are significantly more active than black's. And that is exactly the case in this specific scenario here. It's true that black gets to clarify these structures, but he's going to struggle significantly to get the activity that white is enjoying currently. In the game, Magnus takes on c5, and Hikaru actually inserts an intermezzo here with the move a6, sort of removing these threats of knight d6, of knight c7 immediately. You don't want to play a move like knight d6 immediately here. You're going to run into the move knight takes c5, sort of kicking the legs out from underneath this knight, and now you have nothing better than to start trading, and these trades are actually just going to be beneficial for black, letting him activate his pieces. So rather than knight d6, the world champion chose knight b to d4, and we actually saw bishop takes c5 rather than knight takes c5 from Hikaru. And this is a move that sort of surprised me at first glance. At first glance, you really would think you want to take this pawn with the knight. This is sort of why Hikaru is playing knight b d7 before playing c5. Taking with the knight is slightly more comfortable. In this case, though, maybe he was concerned about a move such as b4 here, when all of a sudden this knight does get to e4, but the point of white's a3 is sort of shining through now with this extra queenside space on the board. In the game, bishop takes c5, and now if white continued with b4, there's actually a pretty interesting option here of playing the strange-looking move knight b6 as an intermezzo, countering the threat to black's bishop with an attack on white's. I don't know if this is what Hikaru had in mind, but it's definitely a potential option here. Just an example line, bishop d3, now bishop d6 is an extra option for black to immediately trade off these bishops. And like I said, trades in this case definitely advantageous for black in order to untangle his pieces. Anyways, we did see bishop takes c5, kingside castles from Magnus, and now queen e7 by Hikaru. And so far, Hikaru is doing a pretty good job of sort of maintaining the balance here. I do think white has a little bit of an edge in this case, just because Black still has many problems to solve with where his pieces are currently standing. In the game, Magnus played the move Rook c1, which is by no means a bad move, but it does allow Hikaru sort of a chance to make a very serious claim in the center here. In this specific position, Hikaru's sort of only chance to try and equalize is going to be this move e5. e5 challenging White's strong, actively placed pieces in the center. Now, it's understandable why Hikaru didn't want to play this move, and that's because it does open up this very powerful light-squared bishop. This bishop now has access to the king more directly, to this f7 pawn. It also allows moves like, at first glance, knight f5 might be good. It turns out it's not so good because knight f5, the move queen f6 is simply winning. But bishop g5 is a very understandable move, and now Black sort of has to pin himself with knight d to f6. Pawn to f6 is, of course, an illegal move in this case. And now, after a move like knight back to e2, Hikaru is definitely going to be looking to play a move like bishop e6 in the near future. Can't do it now because of the awkwardness with this bishop, but if Black does manage to achieve bishop to e6, trading off these guys, then he's well on his way to equalizing in this game. e5 not played in the game though. Bishop d6 immediately was Hikaru's choice. And now simply bishop a2 is Magnus Carlsen's idea here. He just drops this bishop back and says, okay, I definitely have control of these two files. Why don't I start exerting that pressure on your position? Knight d to f6 was still Hikaru's choice, without e5 inserted. And now the move knight e5 comes on the board. And you sort of realize, well, hey, I missed my chance to play e5. And now after knight e5 by White, it's sort of never going to happen. And this bishop is going to suffer for a long time. Knight back to d7 was actually Hikaru's response to this, sort of admitting his mistake perhaps, saying I do need control of this e5 square. And now it does allow Magnus Carlsen to play a very serious tactic here. So if you're watching at home, go ahead, pause the video, try to find this tactic for yourself. It's a very fun one. Okay, hopefully you've got it. Of course, that tactic is knight takes f... No, just kidding. Knight takes f7 does win, but the move played in the game is even stronger. Knight d to c6. This is sort of a zinger against Hikaru Nakamura, highlighting the fact that these pieces are far too awkward to stay safe on this open d file. Of course, if you capture this knight, we will take back with the knight, hitting the queen. The queen will have to move, and then we can regain our piece on the d6 square. And not only are we regaining the piece, but we are creating some very serious threats of winning even more material. And these threats, I simply think, cannot be parried. For example, if you just move the king out of the way, well, good luck ever untangling these pieces. This rook can't move, this bishop can't move. This rook could come to e8, but it doesn't really do anything. If you try and move like, just for example, e5 here, you're going to get met with queen to c7, and you have all the same issues. This rook's coming in, and this is just simply devastating for Black. Hikaru, of course, knows this, so he tries to not capture this knight on c6, going for queen h4 instead. But now, Magnus plays very simply bishop g3, hitting the queen, queen g5, h4, hitting the queen again, queen f6, knight g4, hitting the queen again. No safe squares for this queen. The queen now comes all the way to b2. Magnus inserts bishop takes d6, hitting this rook. No time to capture on c6 no time to capture on a2, as the move knight e7 check would come in with takes on c8 and takes on f8. No time to take on c6, as the move rook c2 first and then takes on f8. But that is actually what we saw in the game. B takes c6, rook c2. This queen has to move, queen b5, bishop takes f8, and now Magnus is just up a winning amount of material here. He threw in the move h5, sort of tempting Black into capturing on h5, when this queen would just invade very concretely to the d8 square. But in the game, h6 was Hikaru's choice. Now queen f3 on the board by Magnus. Hikaru does decide to capture this pawn on h5, but now queen takes c6 is simply a winning move here. Knight c7 played in the game, queen back to f3, Magnus Carlsen's choice. Now knight up to d5. We got e4, e5 by Hikaru. And then this next move, forced resignation by Hikaru, simply knight takes h6. Some sort of funny tactics in between moves at the end, but the result was never really in doubt from the moment this knight d to c6 move kind of occurred on the board. Magnus kept a winning advantage throughout. Of course, the game could have continued. Queen takes h6, bishop takes d5, and these are two threats that cannot be parried at the same time. So Magnus Carlsen winning a very convincing game here against Hikaru, and I'll be interested to see how Hikaru responds to this line if it is played against him again. Of course, I do think there are much better choices for black than the line that Hikaru chose, and I definitely would expect him to be switching lines to something else against this move a3. That's all for today on Game Review. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.